Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT patch rundown video. Today we'll be diving into the first patch of the newly launched set 6, 1122. Gizmos and Gadgets is now live and ready for everyone to hop in and enjoy the new set. For today's patch, we'll be exploring the new mechanics, item adjustments, and a few other system changes. There won't be any balance changes to discuss, as all of that was done on the PvE prior to launch. With all that said, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. To start off with, let's go over the ranked changes being introduced in Gizmos and Gadgets. The major change being added is that players will no longer be demoted in rank from tiers of Iron to Master. Keep in mind that it's possible to still demote between divisions within a tier, but players will no longer be able to go from Masters down to Diamond, as an example. This is a nice change for players that have ladder anxiety or take breaks from TFT. Once you obtain the next tier, you're set. This allows for more freedom in experimenting and can be seen as a bit of a reward for doing well. That said, Challenger and Grandmaster players can still demote, so the climb doesn't end for them. Overall, this change may be controversial because it does promote account sitting specifically in Masters, meaning it can take away the accomplishment of hitting that tier and keeping it. Still, the fact is the majority of the player base is likely happy with the change, and what makes the majority happy is helpful for player retention and bringing new players into the game. There isn't much else to talk about for ranked other than the usual reset of ranks down into Iron 2, as well as the 5 provisional matches. Keep in mind that you won't lose any LP during those first 5 games and gain additional LP from winning, so going in with a game plan to top 4 consistently during those matches will help you hit a higher rank much faster. With that out of the way, let's move on to the meat and potatoes of the patch, the system changes. Before we get into the new set mechanic, we should point out that Duo mode is not enabled for the first patch of set 6. This new mode called Double Up will be released in the next patch, so anyone that was excited about playing duos, don't worry. It will be out soon, and if you really want to test it out, you can hop into the PvE. Now it's time for the Hextech augments, which are the mechanic for Gizmos and Gadgets. Folks, this is possibly the craziest set mechanic we've had thus far. The basics of it is that each game on stages 1-4, 3-3, and 4-5, every player is given the option of 3 different Hextech augments. The options are different every game, and there's a lot of them, like a whole lot of them. There's 3 different tiers for augments, with the tier 1 being weaker than the tier 3. Some augments are unique, so you won't see multiple variations of them, while others have multiple tiers. This creates a very unique experience because almost no game will be the same due to the sheer amount of options every game. Sure, you may see similar augments across your matches, but having the same 3 in multiple games, unlikely to happen. It's important to note that while yes, there is a power difference between augments, it's balanced because every player is given options from the same tier. So if the first augment of the game is tier 1, every player gets options from tier 1. That said, games can and will get wild, especially if the higher tier augments happen right away on stages 1-4. This can make for some super fun and crazy games, though it does feel like tier 1 and 2 happen far more frequently. When compared to other sets, it's not even a question of whether or not Hextech augments are the most ambitious mechanic. Set 3 Galaxies is the most comparable, but even then, there are over 100 augment options, whereas Galaxies, there were only a handful at any given time, plus normal games could still occur. There are no normal games in set 6, as every match will end with players having 3 unique augments. There's a few points worth talking about in regards to Hextech augments. The major concern is, of course, balance. With so many augments in every game, it will be a Herculean feat to properly balance everything throughout the set. Thankfully, they've made it slightly easier by breaking down augments into different tiers, so they have a rough idea of how strong or weak augments are. Another point is that of variance. Augments are inherently random, that's just how it is. Yes, everyone gets the same tier, but not every augment is made equal on top of general luck in a game like TFT. Adding so much potential variance to the game is going to make it a lot more fun, yes, but it also may turn players off that dislike the frustrating elements of low rolling. It may cause issues for competitive play since high variance sets usually mean less skill expression, even though those sets are generally more fun. And finally, the last potential issue is, where do they go from here? Set 6 feels like the culmination of everything that's been learned so far from each set in TFT. Will they have to keep augments in the game forever now because not having them makes the game less interesting? It's an interesting question that we may not need to explore so early on into the new set, but it is worth taking into consideration. Alright, that's it for Hextech augments, though we do recommend checking out any online resources that showcase the full list of augments. It's daunting to learn, but having a quick glance at possible augments will help when playing. Let's move on to a quick change being done to loot orbs. With augments adding so much to the game, they've decided to tone down how often Nico's help drops from blue and gold orbs. How much isn't specifically said, just that they, quote, slightly reduced it. While this isn't that major of a change, it is worth keeping in mind that hitting high roll Nico's helps may not happen as often as it did in previous sets. Overall, this is a good thing. Nico's help can straight up win games in the right situation, so reducing how often it can drop is important for a set with high variance mechanics like augments. Perhaps this will lead to Nico's help being removed entirely from the game if augments end up being a permanent feature of the game. In the final section for today's patch review is item changes. As with any new set, it's common for items to receive significant updates, whether that's a rework or just a number of adjustments to better suit them for new champions and synergies. Before we dive into the changes, we want to remind players that there is a whole new list of emblems to learn. We highly recommend looking up item cheat sheets for this, as knowing the spatula combinations can be important. We'll speed run through quite a few of these changes since some of them are smaller, but to start, let's cover with the reworked items. The first reworked item is Archangel Staff. Archangel Staff no longer scales off max mana, but instead is based around time. For every 4 seconds during combat, the item holder gains 25 ability power. This can be quite a good item for boards that stall out fights, but it can also be useless in a fight that ends too quickly. That said, this new design is much healthier for the game in terms of balance, but it also makes it more viable on all AP champions instead of the previous iteration only being good on high mana pool units. Next up is Banshee's Claw. Banshee's Claw was easily the best item change that they've ever done, but as it turns out, having a full spell block on up to 3 champions is kinda too good. So they're reworking it to now block an ability, but only up to 600 damage. Second Banshees also no longer blocks multiple spells, instead it will increase the amount of damage blocked. This is probably a good change overall because the previous version was just too strong. Another reworked item is Deathblade. Deathblade will no longer stack per takedown, instead the item holder gains a flat amount of bonus attack damage. The amount gained is 50, 75, 100, including components. For balance reason, this change makes a lot of sense. From a player perspective though, it's lame. It's lame because it takes away the identity of an item and now just makes it a flat stat increase. There's no scaling or anything interesting about it, the champion just gains bonus damage. Woo. Like a lot of these changes, yes, it's good for balance, but maybe they should just rename the item to Blade because the death part of it was removed. Barrel Vest gains a new shiny coat of paint as the item now adds 80 bonus armor. Since it's gaining more defensive stats, they're lowering the damage it does from 80, 100, 150 down to 60, 80, 120. Honestly, at this point, the damage is so negligible, it may be worth reworking that aspect. That said, Bramble is even better than it was before because of the increased armor. Dragon's Claw has been doing well since it was reworked, but it was potentially too good in the new set. To address this, they've lowered the damage it does from 30% of the enemy's max health down to 18%. To compensate, they did lower the cooldown from 1 second down to 0.5, but overall it is still a slight nerf. During the PvE, it was clear that Giant Slayer was just a tad bit too good against a lot of compositions. There's a lot of high health targets in set 6, plus augments in traits that increase the health of units even more. So that leads to the Giant Slayer nerf where the damage threshold is now 1800 up from 1600. A necessary change, otherwise Giant Slayer would be the best item for every champion. Hand of Justice has also proven to be a bit too good on multiple champions, so the bonus stats are going down to 30 from 35. Still a good item, just not slammable on every single champion, every single game. Taking a page from the Radiant version, Hextech Gunblade will no longer grant shields for overhealing. Instead, the item will also heal the lowest health ally, so instead of being carry-focused, it's now utility-focused. An interesting change to be sure, though the amount of viable users of it remains to be seen. Jeweled Gauntlet gets a small buff and nerf as it's gaining 10 AP, but goes down to 30% critical damage from 40%. There's a fair amount of viable AP champions in set 6, so the critical damage nerf makes sense. Much like Gunblade, Quicksilver is gaining the bonus stat the Radiant version had in set 5. In addition to being immune to CC, the item holder also gains 20% attack speed. This is a great change for an underutilized item, especially since set 6 has a lot of CC. You may very well see Quicksilver once again become a staple item for carries. Rapid Fire Cannon was a tad bit weak, so they've bumped the attack speed from 40% to 50%. It's still a niche item, maybe even more so in set 6, as no carry so far has felt reliant on the extra range. There's plenty of melee carries though, so time will tell if RFC becomes viable or remains on the shelf collecting dust. Tragically, Ruden's Hurricane will no longer trigger on-hit effects. To compensate for this devastating loss, they've added 10 additional attack damage, but let's be real, losing the on-hit effect is quite unfortunate. It's still likely to be a good item, and it will help with balance, but still, pour one out for builds like Yasuo. And finally, Static Shiv. Ever since they nerfed Shiv, they've tried quite hard to make it relevant again. This time the attempt comes with a 15% additional attack speed bonus. Definitely a nice boost, and hopefully won't lead to the return of War Week. That's all we've got for you for today, folks. There are some changes to Hyper Roll for anyone interested, but besides that, we covered all the new changes being introduced. We highly recommend reading the patch notes and looking up online resources to help learn everything being added. Don't forget, the goal at the end of the day is to have fun, even if it's a bit overwhelming having so much new information to process. Let us know in the comment section below what you're the most excited for in Set 6. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.